Shopify grows your business no matter how far or big you grow. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. Whether you're selling your fans' next favorite shirt or an exclusive piece of podcast merch, Shopify helps you sell everywhere. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S. Allbirds, Rothy's, Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. Because businesses that grow, grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in.
He's the most terrifying serial killer you've never heard of. Haddon Clark has confessed to several murders, but investigators say he could have over 100 victims. At the center of the mayhem, a cellmate of Haddon's that was able to get key evidence into Haddon's murder spree across America because Haddon thought he was Jesus Christ. Born Evil, the Serial Killer and the Savior, an ID true crime event, premieres Monday, September 2nd at 9. Watch on ID or stream on Max. Set your DVR.
Welcome back to Crime Capsule. I'm your host, Benjamin Morris. Sometimes it's said that marriage changes a person. They become more secure, more bold, more willing to take risks if they know that their spouse loves them. There's a good bit of truth in this, the way that loving couples uphold one another and encourage each other. But it's also said for a different type of person, marriage does not transform them, it reveals them. It pulls back the veil on who they really are, warts and all. Sometimes knives, daggers, and all. As we round up our series of crimes of passion for the hot summer months, I'm just going to come right out and say it. I am fascinated by the character trope of the Black Widow, the woman who marries just to kill, who does so over and over, who seems to take an ice-cold pleasure in the calculation of it, the scheming, the execution, both figuratively and literally. We've featured these types of killers a number of times on Crime Capsule, and every time I meet a new one, I get the same chills down my spine I did the very first time. If you are in any way the same, then grab a seat and strap in for a tale brought to you by Larry Wood, longtime historian and author of Murder and Mayhem in Southeast Kansas, published by the History Press, about a Black Widow who wove a web from which none could escape, and she did it over and over and over. Larry, welcome to Crime Capsule. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I tell you, we are working on this series of crimes of passion for the hot summer months. And it is so interesting to me because as we travel to the heartland, we find no shortage of crimes of the heart there, do we?
Right. Well, that's kind of what I like to write about. I mean, I write about any kind of notorious crimes, but I particularly enjoy writing about the ones where there's some sort of jealousy involved or a love triangle or something like that, you know.
You know, we never want to see it happen, but it sure does add some spice. I mean,
yeah.
No doubt. It's it's a little more interesting than your garden variety jewel heist gone wrong, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a tendency of modern day people to think that sort of thing didn't happen very much back in 100, 150 years ago, but in my experience, it did happen probably about as frequently, not as frequently because the population was a lot less, but as frequently as a percentage of the population.
Larry, it's interesting because we have recently been looking at cases set in different cities, and we were just in Richmond, Virginia. And one of the interesting things that came out of that particular discussion was the way in which strict social mores and expectations can often create tensions in people's hearts, to where they do something that they never would have dreamed of doing because they were maybe feeling hidebound by their culture or something like that. The constraint proved to be the catalyst. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I think I do. I mean, I know that, during the Victorian era, there, like you say, there were a lot of strict social mores, and I don't know, sometimes I guess maybe someone just wanted to bust out of those or something. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Or they were doing it all the time, and we just have to pick up on those, cases that we do find where we actually, learn something about it, or whether it was recorded or something like that. So it's an interesting question. Now, you are an expert in the history of this particular area. You have I'm just going to go ahead and say this. So many books that you can't actually count them. They're somewhere in the low 20s. You said.
Well, I could count them if I wanted to stop and actually, do an enumeration, but I don't try to keep track. I mean, I know it's somewhere right like 21, 22, something like that, probably.
Yeah. Well, first of all, how on earth did you get your start? And second of all, do you sleep? And how does that work?
Okay. Well, I no longer am a teacher. I'm a retired teacher, so I don't have to juggle two different jobs. But actually, I did not start writing books until I retired from teaching. I have been a writer my whole life, but when I was teaching, I mainly wrote magazine articles and stuff like that, short stories and so forth. And it's only been in the last 25 years. I've been retired for now over 25 years. And it's been during that time that I've written all those books. And I've written about one a year, maybe not quite one a year, but close to one a year.
Which means, if I recall correctly, you're on the Stephen King plan, which is about a book a year.
Yeah. I don't know whether you can turn out a novel faster than you can turn out a nonfiction book or not. The writing goes faster for me with nonfiction, but you got to do a lot of research before you ever start writing.
Right. That's an interesting question. I don't know if that shakes out differently for everybody, or if there is a formula for it. That's a really good question. Well, tell us about this one. So you've got Murder and Mayhem in Southeast Kansas, and it is a compendium of all kinds of different cases. And I got to say, just right up front, Larry, this book has it all. I mean, it's got shootouts, it's got cattle rustling, it's got horse thievery, it's even got the kind of shootouts, we think of the Wild West where, guys roll up and they get into a shootout either in the saloon, right? Or it's the guys who are in the saloon who take it outside the saloon. But my favorite one here is the saloon keepers themselves get involved in the shootout. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
you got everything here.
Yeah. This book, as you know, maybe is the History Press has a whole series of books, the Murder and Mayhem series. Murder and Mayhem in St. Louis, or Murder and Mayhem in Illinois, or whatever. I had previously written a book called Murder and Mayhem in Missouri, and I live in Missouri, but I live very close to the Kansas border, to the southeast Kansas border. And so I ended up, after I wrote the Murder and Mayhem in Missouri book, I got to looking around and think, well, even though I don't live in Kansas, I live close to Kansas, and I go to Kansas a lot. So I decided to go ahead and try to write the Murder and Mayhem in Southeast Kansas book, also kind of as a follow-up to my Murder and Mayhem in Missouri book.
So were you collecting these cases over the years, and you had kind of a little personal file where you would just put the tidbits as you found them, or?
A few of them I had previously written about, like, for instance, the Benders, which I think you said we might talk about later. I had written, I wrote for Wild West magazine. I wrote an article for Wild West magazine about the Benders, and or maybe I don't know for sure if it was Wild West, but some magazine I wrote an article for about the Benders. And let's see, there's a couple of others that I had previously written about. The Daltons trying to rob two banks at once in Coffeyville, Kansas. I'd written about that in magazines. But I'd say about half and half. Maybe half of them I had previously written articles about, and the other half were brand new to me.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a good mix. I mean, there is, as they say, something in it for everybody. So, we love it. Now, one of my favorite cases, and it's the one that we're going to talk about today, is involving, we don't often get one of these, but when we do, we try to, ride it into the sunset. A black widow, a femme fatale, a cold-blooded lady killer, and you can commit a crime of passion, but you can also have ice water running through your veins as you do. So. Yeah, Miss Minnie Walk Up. So my goodness.
Yes. Well, Miss Minnie, this is one of the ones I had not previously written about, so I probably may not be as well versed with it as I have a few of the others, but. Yeah, Minnie was a very interesting case. She was only like 16 years old, I think. She was kind of, a high society girl of New Orleans. And J.R. Walkup, who was the acting mayor of Emporia, Kansas, it was, 1885, I think, was when it happened. Yeah.
1884 was the World's Fair.
Yeah, World's Fair. Yeah, but it was still going on in 1885. And I guess he visited in 1884, but he also came back in 1885, and he made 2 or 3 trips to New Orleans to the World's Fair, and somewhere along the line he made the acquaintance of Minnie's parents, her family, her mother, and I guess he developed a crush on the 16-year-old girl, Minnie, and Minnie Wallace. I was trying to think of her maiden name. Yeah, Minnie Wallace, they ended up getting married. Well, he was like in his mid-30s or something. He'd been previously married, and she was only 16, so he was like 20 years older than her. He ended up marrying her and bringing her. I think they got married in Kentucky, like in Columbus, Kentucky, and he brought her back to Emporia, and it was just a matter of weeks maybe after they had a big reception. It was a big deal, the mayor getting married, and a big social event in Emporia. But then just a few weeks later, or maybe less than a few weeks, maybe just a matter of a week or so, he started getting sick. And come to find out, when the doctor started examining him, he was being poisoned, and they suspected that maybe Minnie was poisoning him to try to inherit his money, inherit his estate, his wealth. And so they arrested her on murder charges. But she claimed that she didn't do it, that the reason they found arsenic and strychnine in his, after he eventually died. It was a kind of an agonizing death, but he eventually died, and they did an autopsy and they found strychnine and arsenic in his system. And she said that, yes, she had bought, there were a couple of drugstore operators who testified that she had come in and bought these poisons, and she readily admitted that she had, but she said she bought the arsenic as a beauty aid. That was fairly common back in those days, as women would use arsenic to get I don't know if they had a blemish or something, it would make their skin more white or more pure or whatever. And so she had bought arsenic for that reason. And she said she bought the strychnine as a cleaning agent. And also the defense pointed out that this Walkup had syphilis and had been a womanizer his whole life. And he also was quite vain, and he used arsenic supposedly to make him more potent, to increase his potency. So it was a big split there in Emporia on the ones that believed her and the ones that didn't believe her. But she was so
well. Before we get to let's take our foot off the gas for a quick second here.
Okay. I'm getting wound up, man.
Let's not let the horse get all the way out of the barn just yet. Before we get into all that nitty gritty, I was just a little curious. I wanted to ask you right up front. what do we know about her? I mean, so we get Walkup traveling down to the World's Fair, right? And he meets this young woman, meets her parents, and things move pretty quickly after that. But what really do we know about her background?
I don't like, other than like I said, I thought she was kind of a socialite, a debutante there in New Orleans. And I know a couple of the New Orleans newspapers described her as, said that the Wallace family the women in the Wallace family were all known for their beauty, but Minnie was even more beautiful than the rest of them, and that she was really kind of almost a celebrated sort of person there in New Orleans because she was so charming and so beautiful. But as far as where the family came from, stuff like that, I really don't know much about that.
Sure. Well, the reason I ask is, our listeners know that I am based here in New Orleans, and folks around here have they have long memories, especially for families. This kind of what they call the old line families, some of which were descended from the French or the Spanish, who settled here in the colonial era after the Americans bought the place. In the early 1800s, you started to see the influx of the American families, and of course Wallace would be among those last names. But the reason I ask is because many of the educational institutions here in this city still survive, the ones that date back to the 1700s and the 1800s and so forth. And so you, in your chapter, Larry, you actually mentioned that she had graduated from one of these finishing schools and so forth. And I just couldn't help but wonder if, deep in the archives somewhere, we know the name of that school, it's still around, and the school has any idea what one of its more celebrated alumni went on to do, because it is, shall we say, a very colorful history, right?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly whether it even. I'm trying to find a place in my book where I said that, but I'm trying to remember. I don't guess I named the school in the text, did I?
Sure. Well, it also makes you wonder, and this is getting back into the details of the case, if Minnie is, she marries this guy, 20, 30 years her senior, maybe she finds out that married life is not exactly what she thought it would be, or married life to him is not exactly what she thought it would be. Yeah. And she starts looking around for kind of an escape hatch. It made me wonder, what are they teaching at these finishing schools down here in Louisiana with respect to arsenic and strychnine?
Right.
What kind of where's the line between, the treatment and the dose as treatment and the dose as poison?
I've written about a couple of other cases where women used arsenic as a beauty aid back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and that was kind of a surprising thing to me. But you mentioned about what would have caused her to driven her to kill her husband, and what really was a puzzle to me is why she did it. So if she indeed was guilty, why she did it so soon? She only waited like a week or so. I mean, right. And she had a cousin that came with her, that came and stayed with them, a male cousin about her own age, maybe a year or so older, who came from New Orleans and stayed with her during the time, I guess, that she was supposedly poisoning her husband, and he was kind of under suspicion as well. That he may have been in on it with her.
Mm-hmm. Is there any evidence to that he might have been a co-conspirator?
I think they ended up dropping. If they even brought charges against him, they ended up dropping charges. They didn't pursue it. Yeah.
So there's one interesting aspect of the case here. Yes, I completely agree with you that it is maybe a little brash to wait not even a whole week before you start the plan B option there for how to get out of a marriage. But, I did think it was interesting. And you brought up the fact that she made a fairly major error in her thinking, right? Which was she had to get the poison from somewhere. Right.
Yeah.
And it's small town, right? Peoria was not large at the time. There's only a handful or a finite number of pharmacists in the area. And of course, one would think that the mayor's wife would be a fairly recognizable figure, especially if he'd gone to the trouble of bringing her all the way back, from New Orleans, Louisiana, and throwing a big thing for. Okay,
had a big reception. So had a big reception for her when she got back.
All the locals, would have been in attendance, that kind of thing. It's kind of interesting to me that she would then think, oh, well, let me just go pick up some of this stuff from one of the local, purveyors, and no one will think twice of it, right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I still hold out a little bit of possibility that maybe she wasn't guilty. I'm not total 100% convinced that she was guilty. I think she probably was. It makes more sense that she was, but I don't know. Maybe she just charmed me the way she was charmed everybody else, or something. Because
100 years after the fact.
Yeah, 100 years after the fact, because they said that a lot of people who started in thinking she was guilty, when they go actually talk to her, came away thinking she wasn't.
Yeah. So a couple things came out at the trial. I mean, yeah, you mentioned that the late great mayor had been a syphilitic, which suggested that he was maybe not as great, as people had thought. Right. Right. In some ways, they did do the autopsy, and things came out of that. But it sounds like she was able to just captivate those in attendance. And I mean, what after prosecution and defense, showed their sides, what happened at the end of the trial?
Well, I'm trying to find a place where I talk about how she captivated everybody, but
yeah.
Well, what happened at the end of the trial was she was acquitted, but and it was mainly, she just charmed the jury, even, I guess. She I know that someplace in here I talk about where people would go visit her when she was after she had been arrested. They would go visit her and talk to her, and thinking that she was guilty, and they would come away thinking that she wasn't guilty. Yeah, here we go. So the public was divided on the question of Minnie's guilt, but most of those who talked to her came away convinced that she was blameless. Minnie seemed to exercise an influence over those brought into contact with her that is remarkable. So she just seemed to have a charisma about her, or a charming magnetism that caused people to come over to her side.
Well, and she took the stand. She got in that box, and you're right that she actually held up under the questioning, and she didn't crack.
Right, said that they questioned her very severely, but she like you say, she held up and kept her composure, and was very convincing, apparently.
There is one detail here, which is, yeah, you say that they were split 6 up, 6 down, and eventually acquitted. The detail that got me, and this is one of those things where, because we do not exactly know beyond a shadow of a doubt whether she did it, it's hard to know how we should take this particular detail, Larry. But I'll tell you, you write that after her acquittal, they threw a reception for her at home. She was a free woman. And what did she do? But like any graduate of a fine finishing school, she sat down and she entertained her guests, and she played the piano for them.
Played the piano, yeah. Played the piano, yeah. Yeah. She was kind of the star of the show, Yeah.
It makes you wonder how many folks in that room could not help but think, what's actually going on here? Is she celebrating getting away with it?
Yeah, she was either innocent, or she was very, very good at fooling people, putting up a front. She was she was very good at that.
So one of the arguments in your book is that we can have our own theory of the case, but the story was not yet over, frankly, and that you write that her guilt makes more sense because, like any good Black Widow, she's going to keep weaving her web and catching whatever flies she can, right, over the course of the next few years. And so Walk Up he was only the first, if we're taking the cynical line, her murdery career, began at age 16, but it was only just the beginning, right? So she and her mother end up leaving Kansas that year. And this is kind of interesting dimension where, yes, she did receive some of his money, not all of it. He had other children who were beneficiaries, but she did receive some of his money. She was able to use that to travel. And then she starts meeting these other very prominent individuals. And we're talking, businessmen, United States senators. We're talking the high and the mighty, right?
Yeah.
Who come into her orbit.
Yeah.
And they don't all end well.
Yeah. Well, I guess shortly after her acquittal there in Emporia, she returned to New Orleans, and then she and her mother started traveling around the globe, kind of, I guess partly on the money that she had gotten from Walk Up. And like you say, she started traveling in circles of high society, I guess you might say, a senator and a prominent businessman. And I think she ended up, what was the guy's name that she ended up marrying, the first one?
Well, there was Ketchum. First of all, there was Ketchum from Chicago. Yep.
Yeah, in September of 1897, she ended up. She had an affair with the senator. At least he was infatuated with her, and so on and so forth. But he didn't. She didn't marry him. She married this guy named Ketchum, and then he mysteriously started having symptoms similar to what Walk Up had. He started dying of poison too, or something.
It's a funny thing, Larry, because I'm thinking strictly in terms of the social expectations and the codes of the day. I mean, it would have been very unusual for a 16-year-old girl, at this point, maybe an 18-year-old girl to be, a young woman, I should say, to be traveling on her own, throughout all these different cities and so forth. And it made me wonder whether... what role is her mother playing in all this? Her mother is kind of not her legal guardian anymore, but certainly her social guardian, right? Yeah,
kind of.
And is her mother procuring these, invitations to balls and affairs and parties where she's meeting these men? There's not a lot of evidence in this chapter, but I was just trying to think of the fact that, you record there's a duo here who are moving around. It's not just her.
Yeah, as I told you before we started actually officially talking here, I did not really research Minnie that much after the Emporia deal because the name of the book is Murder and Mayhem in Southeast Kansas, so I concentrated mainly on the Kansas incident. But the fact that she was involved in these other cases where she was suspected of poisoning her lovers, her husbands, or her lovers, or whatever. That's the main evidence to suggest to me that she probably was guilty in the Kansas incident also,
Yep. And there's a third. So after she marries John Ketchum in Chicago, he dies, right? Suspicious circumstances.
Right. Left almost all of his estate to her, I think.
Yep. And then there's a third one that you have to sort of fast forward in time a little bit from the mid 1890s to the mid 19-teens. So, there's been
guy named Louderback was her next victim. Yeah. I guess had been kind of carrying on in secret, and when he died, it actually didn't come out until after he died, I think, that he'd been carrying on with his so-called secret friend,
Right. Just interesting. There's a little pattern. Ketchum was a wealthy Chicago businessman. Ladderback was a millionaire capitalist. I mean, she's not going for the burger flippers at the local diner, is she?
Right. No. She was definitely a high. Well, I started to say high roller, but that's kind of a gambling metaphor. But she was a operated in high society for sure. And as far as the question you posed a while ago about her mother kind of, being her guardian or social guardian, I think that probably was the case. I mean, I suspect maybe her mother might have even been kind of pulling the strings, more or less, like you say, pointing her toward these people or something,
Yeah, we can't know for sure, and we're not going to speculate.
No.
But it is interesting that everybody in Minnie's immediate family stood to gain from her marrying and then burying these millionaire capitalists,
right.
one after another.
But of course, by the time we're talking now, that's the 1914 case, the third case of poisoning. She was well into adulthood then. She was
right.
Yeah, but particularly in the first case, I think her mother may have been, had been instrumental in what happened. Like you say, we can't prove that, but it's kind of logical to assume that maybe that might be the case.
Yeah. The first two back to back like that, really, they don't pass the smell test. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
it is a fascinating story. We do love a good Black Widow here, and one of the things that you note in your book, Larry, and I think that it is important to say this, is that there was never any direct implication. It was all circumstantial. It was all hearsay. It was all kind of, if she did it, she was very, very good at covering her tracks. If she didn't do it, then it sure was a whole bunch of unusual coincidences lined up next to one another. And we don't know. We just don't know for sure.
Don't know for sure, but, because coincidences do happen. But 3 in a row like that, though, would really be very coincidental, But it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility, though.
I hear you, especially when they're not all burger flippers. So,
right.
And no disrespect, no shade on burger flippers, but
like on the second one,
you're right.
Pardon me. I think on the second one, the official ruling was that he died of acute alcoholism or something, not poisoning. So, maybe that's a possibility. I don't know.
It is possible. Now, the last detail, which is interesting here, is that you write she actually lived a long and full life, and that she lived out her years and died in San Diego in the 1950s. She was 88 years old, and to the best of our knowledge, probably deserves, another look. We don't know of any other prematurely dead millionaire capitalists in that last 40-year chunk of time. But maybe one will turn up.
Yeah, I don't know. As I said, I did not research her too awfully much after the Kansas thing, because that's mainly what I concentrated on. So yeah, it would be interesting though to kind of take a deeper dive into her later history and see whether, like you say, any other billionaires turned up dead that she came in contact with.
You may have to write a follow-up volume called Murder and Mayhem, in San Diego, according to Minnie Wallace Walkup Louderback Ketchum or whatever, how many last names she ended up accumulating.
Yeah.
But anyway, we do love a good Black Widow around here, and it is always interesting to see that particular dynamic. There are a ton of cases in this particular book that follow all sorts of twists and turns, and it is a real joy to get to spend time with them. Now, Larry, we are going to come back next week with it's not a crime of passion, but I'm just going to say flat out, it is still in this book, and it is arguably one of the most enigmatic, strange, bizarre, grisly, and otherwise captivating cases that may have even existed in the entire Old West at all. And it was so spectacular that we just wanted to cover it with you. It's a little bit of a tease. I'm going to tease everybody right now and just say you got to tune back in next week for this particular case, the case of the Bloody Benders, one of your favorites. So everybody, y'all sit tight for Larry's return next week and this awful awful story he's about to tell us that'll keep you up at night. But until then, thank you for sharing the tale of Miss Minnie and her 18 billion last names and her $14 gazillion that she may or may not have inherited through duplicitous means.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Our guest has been Larry Wood, author of Murder and Mayhem in Southeast Kansas, published by the History Press. To order a copy of the book, visit your local independent bookstore or visit arcadiapublishing.com. Join us next week as we continue our conversation with Larry and for a special bonus episode on one of the grisliest murders in Kansas history. See you then. Thanks as always to our producer, Bill Huffman, our production director, Bridget Coyne, audio engineer, Ian Douglas, and our executive producers, Michael D'Aloia and Gerardo Orlando. I'm your host, Benjamin Morris. Crime Capsule is a production of Evergreen Podcasts and a signature title of the Killer Podcasts Network. You can find Crime Capsule wherever you listen to podcasts. Discover more great true crime and paranormal programming at killerpodcasts.com.
Hi, this is Amy and Vanessa from She Goes by Jane, where we shine light on the stories of missing and unidentified women. On November 7th, we're sharing Nahita's story for the first time in a podcast. And this is a story that I thought I knew, but after reading police reports, became more complicated than I thought. When investigators are called to Nahita Khatib's house, everything looks fine. Her purse is on the kitchen table, her cup of coffee is on the counter, and her 2-year-old niece is in her playpen. The only thing amiss? Nahita is missing.
Every week we feature a poem written in honor of the person we're talking about. This week, we're joined by one of our favorite actresses. You might know her from Sister Act or King of the Hill or The Descendants. But if you're like us, you'll know her from Hocus Pocus. She's the much-beloved Kathy Najimy. Join us November 7th to hear Nahita's story.
Coming up on 5 Minute News, I'm Anthony Davis. You might think it's partisan because maybe it's critical of one side or the other, but it's not, it's just the truth. And I think that's also something that's kind of unusual for Americans listening to the radio or to podcasts, because the news landscape in the States has been so partisan for so many decades. So 5 Minute News is verified, truthful, independent, unbiased, and essential world news daily.